All right. Hey everybody. What I have in mind to say should take about 2 minutes, so I imagine this video will come out to about 10 minutes. But I've been reading this book, and I'm not very far into it. This is my bookmark here. So don't ask me for a review. But the reason I'm reading this is a book of essays about ceremonial magic and related topics by Ramsay Dukes, aka, what's his actual name? It escapes me at the moment. Lionel Schnell, I think. Anyway, I'm reading it. There's a blogger. He's somebody I've interviewed many times. He used to be the archdruid of a large druidic organization in the United States, so he had a blog called the Archdruid Report. He has since retired that, and he now has a blog called Eco Sophia, which I haven't kept up with as well as I used to keep up with his old blog. But his name's John Michael Greer. And at one point, he gave his readers an assignment, and the assignment was, read a book that's more than 100 years old. Why? What's the point of that? Well, the point of that is we're all caught up, you know, in these conversations, these cultural obsessions. We hear the same words, the same arguments. We just get really entrained in the current moment. And if you read something that's 100 years old or more, those people didn't know what our current obsessions are. They couldn't speak in the language. They couldn't repeat the arguments. They couldn't, you know, get trapped in the little, like, ideological loops that we get trapped in. So by reconnecting with that mentality, you break out of the mentality of the current moment. Well, this is a group of essays, a collection of essays written between 1980 and 1989. Now, I was born in 1968, so this isn't a book from before I was born, but it's certainly a book from before the current moment. And it's a book from closer to my birth than to the current moment. I turned 12 in 1980. So all of my teens, not my preteens, but all of my proper teenage years, plus, you know, up to age 22, was lived in the 1980s. So this is the time of my youth, but I didn't know about this guy at the time. This book didn't exist at the time. These are essays that were originally published in a magazine, a British magazine. So yeah, I would not have encountered it, most likely. And I didn't, in actuality. But, you know, getting out of the current moment, reconnecting with, you know, a different strain of thought, it just helps me avoid, you know, getting captured by the current hubbub. I use that word deliberately because it's in a quote I'm going to share in just a minute. So, for John Michael Greer's challenge, read a book that's more than 100 years old, I read Uncle Tom's Cabin. I'd never read it before. You know, I'd certainly heard the epithet Uncle Tom, which means, you know, a black person who panders to, you know, the psychological comfort of whites, you know, who's just a good Negro, which is a terrible, you know, misconstrual of the novel. The Uncle Tom, and I can't stay here because the bugs are just biting the crap out of me. Okay, inside. Anyway, long story short, Uncle Tom, he is put in a position where he can be an overseer on a plantation and use the whip on other slaves, or he can have the whip used on himself. And he, because of his Christian faith, he determines to just endure the lash rather than wield it. And he's beaten to death. That's Uncle Tom. And I didn't know that before I read the novel. So then the second assignment from John Michael Greer, in terms of, you know, getting out of your current headspace via the medium of books, was to read a book that you expect to disagree with. This is a few years ago. And if it were today, I might choose a book by Ibram X. Kendi or, you know, somebody in that crowd. But I tried to read the Turner Diaries. It's a really poorly written book. I mean, yes, the ideology is offensive, but the literary style or lack thereof is equally offensive, and I didn't finish it. And maybe someday I will. I'm not resolving to at this time. I have plenty of other stuff I want to read right now, but that was kind of my reason here. I mean, I've been fixated on artificial intelligence, as you know. Because it's something that's a lifelong interest of mine, but I turned away from it for many years because I got caught up in the technological collapse mindset. And also, it just didn't go anywhere for a very long time. It was just entirely theoretical. And then suddenly, in the last couple of years, poof, in the last 3 or 4 years, it's really moving quickly. And it shows no signs of slowing down. So now's an exciting time to be into AI. But, I thought, let's get out of this mindset. I'm listening to the same voices all the time, listening to the same people bring up the same arguments. And, one of the things, if you're into AI at all, or even science fiction, or even philosophy of mind, I mean, eventually you're going to encounter the simulation hypothesis, which is very common now. I mean, lots of movies have been made about it. But it was also a regular a theme in the fiction of Philip K. Dick, which I mostly read in the 1980s. And a lot of it was written in the 1970s. And in the very unlikely event you've not heard of the simulation hypothesis, it's just the idea that we might very well be living in a simulation. In fact, if it's possible to create simulations in which the inhabitants of the simulation have consciousness and sensory experience, and there's more than one simulation, well, then there's a greater chance that we're living in a simulation than that we're living in bedrock reality. This is all stuff it comes, full dive VR is what you'd call it now, something which is just completely immersive and convincing. You might be in it right now. You don't know. I don't know. I have no commitment on the truth or falsity of the simulation hypothesis, but it is something that is very current and it is very congruent with AI. So I thought, I'm going to read a book about ceremonial magic written in the 1980s. And so and I don't have the title committed to memory. I have to turn it around to give you the whole title. Blast Your Way to Megabucks with My Secret Sex Power Formula and Other Reflections Upon the Spiritual Path by Ramsay Dukes. So I start reading this. What's the first thing he's talking about? In an essay from 1980, he's talking about the simulation hypothesis. He doesn't use that phrase, but, I'm reading like, wait a second, is he? Oh, he is. I go to ceremonial magic from 30 years ago, to get out of my current headspace, and he's talking about something which is central to my current headspace. But from the magician's point of view, and from the point of view of somebody who is friendly to concepts like, reincarnation and UFOs, and anyway, Ramsay Dukes' interest in it is like this. He wants magic to be real, and so he reasons as follows. If it is the case that human thought and consciousness can arise from inanimate matter, from just a few physical laws, and it can be simulated in a computer such that these simulated entities have the same sorts of experiences that we have, which is to say, if there is a mundane, non-magical, non-synchronistic universe that allows for consciousness and it can be simulated, then in all likelihood, because there is just one bedrock reality and there will be multiple simulations with conscious inhabitants, it is entirely likely that we're living in a simulation. If that's the case, and I don't know if he even uses the word simulation, but if it is the case that we're in a simulation and not bedrock reality, well, it's also quite likely that simulations will bear a significant resemblance to the meta universe in which they are embedded. Because to be interesting to the creators of the simulation, they need to illustrate something about the real world, so they have to bear some resemblance to the real world. But, he argues, some simulations will likely be like fantasy novels in that they will be a lot like the meta universe in, how they operate, but there will be different stuff, colorful stuff, magical stuff. That's one possibility. Some simulated universes will be like fantasy novels. So there just will be magic because, the creator of the simulation wanted there to be magic. But then, even in simulated universes where there isn't a deliberate, magic layer inserted into it, it might be more computationally elegant. It might be more computationally economical for a simulated universe, to be built along the lines of connections between things that wouldn't normally be there in the meta universe, which is to say a synchronistic universe, a universe in which synchronicities or meaningful coincidences exist, might be more computationally elegant and thus preferable. And so if there is a real world in which there is no magic, it is quite likely that we are living in a simulated world in which there is, if not magic, then at least synchronicity and other sort of weird, mystical seeming processes going on, just because it's, it takes fewer CPU cycles. Again, I'm bringing modern, terminology to this. He wrote this in 1980. Now, I was talking with an AI. I was talking with Pi, personal intelligence, about it. And personal intelligence was saying, wow, somebody was talking about that in the 80s. And I'm like, yeah, but Philip K. Dick was writing stories about this in the 70s. So it's not that remarkable. It's just what's kind of, I don't want to say, maybe I do want to say synchronistic, is that I go to old books in order to escape my current obsessions, or at least to broaden them. And the old book that I just picked, not exactly at random, but kind of at random, from the very first chapter is dealing with things that I'm thinking about currently. So yesterday I put out a podcast, which is here on YouTube as well. And in fact, all the comments that I get from my podcast these days come into the YouTube versions of them, in which I read a letter from somebody, an email from a long time listener and commenter, and somebody I've met in real life, and somebody I know, basically, and whose position I'm going to take seriously, who, if they ask me to do something, I'm likely to do it. And this person asked me to watch the 3-hour interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and I declined. And the reason I gave was, and here's where I started quoting the Unabomber. I said, there are known techniques for propaganda. There are known techniques for mind control and worldview manipulation that you employ on other populations, because you're running a psyop on them, or you're looking to control them at a psychological level. But then if you go to business school, there are courses called, organizational management, where it's a list of techniques. It is a collection of, it's a body of knowledge about how to keep the people on your own team in line, in terms of their ideas, their psychological, predilections, their ideological allegiances, basically worldview management for your team. But in addition to all of these techniques, which are known and explicated and taught, there are other mechanisms for welding groups of people into units that aren't known to us, because they're not something we do to others or that we do to ourselves. These are just evolved things, evolved features of human psychology of which we are unaware, but which still help to create these group minds and these group projects, which I'm going to call hubbubs, just for the sake of this quote that I'm going to share in a minute. And to me, the whole experience of COVID, for me, the most interesting thing about it was that you got groups and group minds and group commitments to certain ideas, which just seem really arbitrary and random, and they even flip, a couple times. Like when Trump was president, I was reading people on Twitter saying, I will never take the Trump vaccine. But when Biden was elected, these are the same people who started saying, if you don't take the vax, you're a murderer. It was the same vaccine. So the positions are just really arbitrary, but they do harden, and they do become associated with different factions. And it's, there are known psychological processes and predilections which lead to this, but according to, Theodore John Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber, there are unknown, evolved psychological mechanisms at work here as well. But, either way, if you get caught up in one of these online, ideological battles, and you associate yourself with a particular tribe, and you devote a significant amount of your mental effort, and your attention, your psychic energy to this battle, it comes to dominate your consciousness. And to me, if I look at people who are really caught up in the whole COVID vaccine online debate, I don't envy them. I don't look at how they're conducting themselves, you know, and the things that they're focused on and the media that they're consuming and think, man, I wish I was into that. I should really get into that. No, I think, yuck, I want nothing to do with that. And so that's the reason that I gave. But just this morning, reading the second essay in this collection, I came across just a marvelous quote which really condenses all of that. And this is where hubbub comes in. Self-cultivation, or finding one's true will, consists of turning away from the hubbub of obsessions around us, which are trying to possess us. Only when local thoughts in the machine are quelled does there come awareness of the higher nature, and the path to initiation commences. Now, am I saying that I have set myself upon a path that will take me to enlightenment and stay tuned, you know, watch this channel for enlightenment? No, I'm not saying that. All I'm really saying is I don't want to get caught up in that battle. Surely one side is closer to the other in terms of the factual accuracy of their beliefs. But what's the benefit of being on the correct side? You know, the side that will eventually be vindicated. And here's the thing. I think I said this in the podcast yesterday. I'm pretty sure that in time, the true facts of the matter will come to the surface. And over a longer period of time, maybe after everybody alive now has died, the true facts of the situation will be accepted by the majority of the populace. Do I care if what I believed in 2023 is vindicated in 2270? No. I'll just go out on a limb and say, no, I don't care. I don't get anything from it. It doesn't put any money in my bank account. It doesn't get me any love. You know, it doesn't even like help me stay skinny or get skinny, as the case may be. There's just not a whole lot of benefit to it that I can see. So I'll stop talking now. That's the point. That's the point I wanted to make. Ask me a question. Talk to you later.